another edition of the Energy Week podcast. Ryan Ray alongside the one, the only, Dr. Energy herself, diehard Boston Celtics fan, Ellen Wald. Ellen, how's it going?
Let's talk about Taco Fall. In case you don't know, he is the 7'6" center for the Boston Celtics.
Yes, big guy, big fella. You know, it's funny, I owe you an apology. On this show about a month ago, I said R.I.P. New York Giants. They have made a resurgence. Except
for yesterday, which was kind of sad. And
well, at the time, I didn't know if they'd win more than 2 games. So so you know what? All things considered, they're doing pretty good.
They'll be better when half of the team isn't injured.
Okay, a lot to get into, and just a side note, there was a tweet I retweeted yesterday from former guest Dr. Paul Sullivan. You and him will be sharing a panel. We can talk about that at the end, but Don't let me forget, because that was, for listeners who are interested in that kind of stuff, that would be a lot of fun to attend. So we got a guest coming on, so let's get into it. Ellen from the Los Angeles Times. Trump shifts policy on Syria, ordering pullback of U.S. troops from border with Turkey. You know, someone was asking me about this, just maybe an hour ago, said Trump was tweeting out some stuff about some pullbacks, and I didn't exactly see the full breadth of the tweets, but it was something to this effect. Obviously, this could have some interesting implications for the markets. They don't like instability and things like that, but
they probably don't like Turkey invading another country.
They probably don't.
But speaking of markets, let's discuss the most up-to-the-minute, brand new information from the president. I'm going to call up this tweet because this was really interesting, because he said that he tweeted, "As I have stated strongly before, and just to reiterate, if Turkey does anything that I, in my great and unmatched wisdom, consider to be off limits, I will totally destroy and obliterate the economy of Turkey I've done before." So if we're talking about threats to the global economy, I mean, I'd say that might qualify as one. Totally obliterate the economy of Turkey if they do anything I don't like.
Okay, so hold on. In my great and unmatched wisdom, a few weeks ago, he said something about it being a messiah or something, and I didn't go back and watch the original clip. He said it was kind of an offhand joke. I can't remember what it was. He said something about being a super smart or savior or something like that. So, do you think, in my great and unmatched wisdom, is he hearkening back to that kind of making fun of the media for believing everything he says, or does he really believe this, or what's going on here? I thought it
was a Wizard of Oz reference, personally. I think he's being a bit facetious here. Yeah, probably that. But so I think everyone will be hung up on the great and unmatched wisdom as opposed to the totally destroy and obliterate the economy of Turkey. So it's interesting if you take this in conjunction with, apparently there's some new bill that Lindsey Graham wants to put forward that basically says something like, if Turkey invades Syria, then we're going to kick them out of NATO, which is apparently not something that the U.S. can legislate. Because Turkey is a member of NATO, and presumably to kick someone out of NATO involves NATO people as opposed to U.S. legislators. I mean, this obliterate the economy of Turkey is interesting. I mean, I guess we could with tariffs. I mean, apparently the previous tariffs were pretty bad, such that they released the guy who had been in Turkey preaching, the pastor. Yes, the pastor. I mean, I think people are like making so much of something that is not hugely significant, but I don't know.
Do you remember, did you watch The Avengers?
I feel like there are like 10. I don't know. The
very first Avengers.
No.
Okay. So at the very first Avengers, spoiler alert, they find an epic battle. Shocker. Okay. And at the very end of the movie, they have a post-credit scene, and it's all the Avengers sitting around this restaurant that was kind of loosely referenced earlier in the movie. And they're all sitting around, like, completely exhausted. No one's saying a word, and they're just eating sandwiches. It feels like at the end of the Trump administration, that's what we're all going to do. We're all going to sit around, smoke, get a drink. We're not going to say anything. We're just going to eat a sandwich and be like, wow.
Yes.
That was insane.
Yes, that was insane. Here's the thing. I mean, like, okay, Turkey invading Syria is an issue, no doubt. The people who should really be concerned about that are the Syrians, namely Assad, and also the Kurdistan regional government in northern Iraq, because, you know, I guess that's a threat to them. It's sad. Okay, I just feel like people who are like, we're abandoning the Kurds. We already abandoned them. Let's like be realistic here. We abandoned them a long time ago. Like they were never our friends. If we like, I'm not that they weren't friends, but like we were never really helping them. If we wanted to help them and protect them and set them up with their own state, then we would have done that. We didn't. So for people who are like, oh, you're suddenly abandoning them by like pulling out the like 300 troops who are still there, I think they've already been abandoned a long time ago.
I gotta say,
we can debate whether or not that was a good idea.
Sure.
But
no,
you know, I'm not
reading the responses to Trump's tweets. You thought your Harry Potter tweet was your response was pretty brutal, man. I wonder if he reads his replies. People that reply to him.
Oh, like, I don't think so.
I'm just looking at some of the stuff people are saying to him. It's like, good grief. Oh man. Well,
who responds to these things though? Like, do they think the president will like retweet them? Like, why bother?
Yeah,
does it make you feel good?
I think it makes him feel good. Also, in case you didn't know, Trump's on Instagram. I had no idea of this, but he's apparently on Instagram as well.
Oh, really? I know Ivanka was on Instagram.
Yeah, he's on Instagram, so there it is. You know, it's I don't. I was making the reference about when he's out. It's so weird where we're at right now, and it feels like the oil markets should finally be able to recover from all the upheaval from a few years ago, start to get their head around the Shale Revolution and the impacts, and then there's Iran drone strikes and Saudi Arabia getting hit, and it's like when because you remember 2 years ago the Middle East was pretty quiet. It seemed to be pretty quiet for a little while, and then now it's kind of like that. That's kind of, that beat's getting drummed up again. So I don't know, maybe the news media wasn't covering it enough, but it almost feels like, or maybe they took off a year or two and now they're kind of back at it. But it's crazy.
Oh yeah, and it's also, but people like everyone had their eye on the Gulf. Like, is Iran going to close the Straits of Hormuz? Are Saudi Arabia and Iran going to go to war? Is this going to happen? And then meanwhile, there were like massive protests brewing in Iraq that no one was paying attention to, and this stuff going on in Syria with Turkey. And it just seems like the whole Gulf stuff was way overblown because people love to talk about closing a shipping lane or attacking a ship with a drone. And that's just like so much cooler than talking about this other stuff that was actually much more of a risk or a threat than, the Gulf.
Yeah, no, I know. The real question is do you think former Libertarian Party candidate, oh gosh, what was that guy's name? Gary Johnson knows where Aleppo is now?
Oh, no, I think he still smoked way too much weed.
He's still hitting the reefer. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of Trump, there might be a slight win for Trump. Iran says Chinese state oil firm withdraws from a $5 billion deal. Total, if you remember, already withdrew from this earlier. Was it this year or last year?
Yeah,
they backed up recently.
Last year, right around when the sanctions were announced. So I guess like spring of 2018.
So we got Robbin Goodman coming on in a little bit to talk about U.S.-China relations. But until then, is this a win for the Trump administration that maybe he's getting further down the road with the Chinese than we think? Because you would expect maybe the Chinese, if they're going to negotiate very sternly, they would say, no, we're going to stick it to the U.S. and we're going to keep doing this deal. But withdrawal here might be a good signal. Yeah,
I mean, it either could be. I wasn't thinking about it in those terms, but I think you're right. It could be a signal of like a sign of like, hey, U.S., so it's like a good sign before that. But it could also be a symbol of the fact that like they can't do it and they don't see any profit in it.
Right. No, obviously that
it could just be that they're cutting their losses. I mean, I remember they were all like, see, and I think that Iran basically like gave CMPC Total's share in that deal, or they gave him most of their share. And now Iran's like, no, Iranian companies will take over the development of all of it. Well, I mean, great, but does that mean it's actually going to happen? Iran has a huge amount of natural gas. Now, the natural gas market is, not so great now. Prices are really low. I mean, mostly in the United States, but there's a huge potential for Iranian natural gas in the future. And it kind of goes to what I said about with Venezuela. If they ever do have regime change, or at least a significant change in the way that the way that Iran conducts its oil and gas issues, these could be really beneficial deals that could help Iran, recover its economy if they're willing to allow foreign firms in. And they've always had issues with this. So I'm not surprised, Iran will probably spin this as a super nationalistic, we don't need foreigners to help us kind of thing. But I do think it is a serious sign that things are going really, really badly for the Iranian oil and gas industry. Yeah,
it does say, and let's see here. This is a Tehran-based political analyst. I cannot pronounce his name, so I'm not going to try. The article's in the show notes. But it says China will remain Iran's main trade partner, which is an interesting thing there. You need to have that reassurance if you're the Iranians, at least publicly, because if you lose China as a trade partner, you really have no leverage against the U.S. and what they're trying to do with the sanctions, because China is the one kind of bailing you out. So at least from a PR standpoint, they need to keep this. But from a realistic standpoint, as these negotiations go on, and I think we've talked about this multiple times now, but it's worth reminding the listeners, when you think of Iran, you think of Venezuela, Russia and China are right there linked up with all of those deals. And so will this be a signal that China is ready to negotiate with the U.S.? Maybe it's, as you said, it's just economics. Maybe it's a combination. But it is important that we have to keep that back in our mind, that these things are, I was talking to, I think it was David Blackman the other day. It's been a while back now. And I was just mentioning some of the stuff. And he talked about it. He kind of was saddened by the lack of publications that used to cover this kind of stuff and how everything was interlinked and would follow this. So we've kind of lost that element, but we can't neglect it, because it is really important to think about these issues. These aren't isolated countries doing isolated things. The world is so connected now, especially with the U.S., that you have to kind of remember that what else could be going on in the background.
Yeah, exactly. But also, is China really Iran's primary trading partner? I would have thought that Iraq was.
Well,
I don't know. Maybe they do more business with China, but I don't know. I kind of thought that Iraq was actually the primary trading partner.
Well, let's say primary loosely. They got to be one of the top ones, though, right?
Okay, that's a good point.
Well, the loss in translation was one of the top ones. Translated to primary.
Exactly. That's probably true.
One of our favorite reoccurring non-guests of the show has been Rick Perry, Freedom Gas himself, is apparently considering leaving the Trump administration in November.
Except that's now not true. So I should have deleted that. Apparently today, I compiled these last night, and apparently today he said he's not leaving, or he has no plans to leave.
Well, hold on.
Oh no, breaking news.
Will that be sped up because Trump completely ran him over the bus this weekend by saying he was the one that told him to ask about the Ukrainian deal? Which, let's be honest here. Who better in the world to blame on something stupid than Rick Perry?
Rick Perry, I know. But I don't think that would make Rick Perry have to leave, would it? Rick Perry should just be like, but here's the thing, but from Rick Perry's perspective, literally, right now, Rick Perry is I think he's in the Baltic states, or something. He's doing he's working on some sort of deal between Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, I think, and Poland and Ukraine for natural gas, nuclear, and something else. I mean, he's literally there, hammering something out. I mean, is it really going to stop him? My thought was maybe he realized that he could make a lot more money if he and his buddy from Texas A&M, Khaled Al-Fali, who's now out of a job, team up and start the mother of all energy consulting firms.
Speaking of that, Nate, you need to get Al-Fali on the podcast. We need to go ahead and reach out to his people and get that book.
Yeah,
we'll give him more than 30 minutes.
Yeah. He could tell us the true story of what happened.
The true story. Inside. Hey, we have, just to be clear here, last week, 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, when we had on the folks talking about the Aramco plant blow up, that was 2 weeks ago, I guess it was. We literally broke that news on this show. So it was the first time, might be the last time, but it's not the only time. So wait, it would be the only time. So never mind.
First time.
First time. It is the first time. So if Rick wants to come on or Alfie wants to come on, but yeah, well, so he's not leaving after all. So. Oh, gosh. I was looking forward to him being on panels on, like, NBC or CNN or Fox and just...
He's always got great glasses.
He does have stellar... His glasses game is stellar. I will say that. I can't deny that. Okay, so we'll move on.
Really was hoping he would start this firm with Khaled Al-Fali. Like, I mean, they would just basically kick IHS out of the... I mean, like, what an awesome...
Would Rick Perry add to that or take away, though? I don't know.
Oh, you need him to be the face because Khaled Al-Fali is not. He's not going to be the guy who's going to get the clients.
I gotcha.
You need Rick Perry to
Rick
shake
Perry,
the hands.
VP of Business Development. That's what his title is. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I gotcha. Okay, well, let's go ahead and move on. Ecuador to quit OPEC in 2020 in search of bigger export revenue. Ecuador is one of the smaller members, or it is the smallest. I know it's pretty small in OPEC, and said. Yeah, it's down there at the... Okay, well, it's down there at the bottom. It said on Tuesday it will leave the 14-nation bloc January 1 due to fiscal problems, which will make it a 13-nation bloc, I suppose. Helen, we talked about this, Kyle, maybe when me and you first met, the idea of OPEC, will it continue to be a good thing for some of the members, especially when sometimes the Saudis' interests can trump other things. Now with Russia, their interest is obviously kind of pushing the agenda. Is this the norm? Not the norm, obviously there's only 13 nations. Will we see more of this, or is this kind of Ecuador doesn't really fit in there anyways?
So Ecuador is not actually the smallest. It is currently producing, in September, it produced 540,000 barrels of oil per day.
Okay.
So it's the third smallest. It's ahead of Equatorial Guinea and Congo Brazzaville. Each produce less. So it's small. It's about producing. Oh no, and Gabon. Sorry, it's the fourth smallest. So we've got Equatorial Guinea as the smallest.
It's in the top 10, though. It's in the top 10.
Then Gabon, only now that Qatar's gone. Then Gabon and Congo Brazzaville. They all produce less.
We should change the headline. Top 10 OPEC nation leaves.
Yeah. Oh, that would... See, they should have you right in the headline.
Yeah.
That would be a good headline.
Much better headline.
So what's interesting is, and I think this is something that deserves to be discussed, because when you see Qatar leaving, Indonesia had its membership suspended. You see Ecuador leaving. Like, is one of the benefits for OPEC originally was that small producers had something to gain from being part of this larger group. And it really begs the question of, is there anything out to gain for them? Is there anything that they gain by being in OPEC? Particularly this year, 2019, OPEC has not succeeded in doing very much to keep oil prices up. So from Ecuador's perspective, they're like, well, us constraining our little bit of production isn't actually doing anything, and the group constraining its production isn't doing anything. So from their perspective, Saudi Arabia cutting all those barrels of oil is not helping them. Right. So why are we still in this group? Why are we paying? First of all, they have to pay membership dues to OPEC. Right. So why are we paying our membership dues to OPEC? They don't listen to us. And wouldn't it just be better for us to increase our production by, say, I don't know, maybe they could increase it by like 100,000 barrels a day, or maybe they could increase it by 50,000 barrels a day, and they'd make more money that way. Now, my question is, why don't they just say, to hell with it, like Iraq does, and just overproduce, and then in the meetings, they'll get their wrists slapped, and they can be like, okay, we'll cut next month, and just don't do it. But from their perspective, I think they maybe they don't want to deal with it, maybe they want to deal with the pressure. They're having serious domestic issues. So maybe the idea that they are leaving OPEC is supposed to help quell those domestic issues that they're having over fuel prices.
Well, and we talked about this before. Geographically, they are really close to Mexico, Canada, the United States. I don't know if leaving OPEC will help trade negotiations there, but it's not like they are all the way over there by Saudi Arabia or Iran, Iraq. They are literally on this side of the world. I don't want to say a short plane flight, but not a bad plane flight down to Ecuador. So do you think they can open up some kind of trade deal, negotiations with maybe Mexico, who obviously is always looking for, they need more oil and gas, or some U.S. company might see some benefit here? Do you think that might be a play?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, look for Ecuador to maybe try to move closer to Mexico and those nations.
Did you see the story about Mexico taking back from, I think it's Telos, taking back the oil fields they discovered?
No.
Yeah, so
Ooh.
I think it's Telos. Anyways, they discovered, under the last administration, they discovered some oil offshore, and when they were selling the blocks off, if you remember. And then now the new president, who's kind of getting rid of those old rules, is threatening to give it to Pemex. And so,
oh wow, that's big. That's a bad precedent too.
That's a very bad precedent. So let's see here. Let's get to one more story before Robbin hops on here. BP to make Bernard Looney CEO as climate change looms. Is that a you're smart here. What do you call those? They do those things, alliterations?
Alliteration. I didn't think of that, but it wasn't as good as the headline I saw about. There's something about, like, someone wrote some headline about the impact of sanctions on Iranian fishermen, and they had some sanctions waves. I thought that was like the greatest headline ever.
So, Ellen. Should we take anything? Will BP fundamentally change their business? Will they be into the solar and wind business? Will they give up the dirty oil and gas? Or will Looney be sane and keep doing what they're doing?
Yeah, I don't know. Bob Dudley is seen as this great guy who somehow navigated BP through the horror that was deep. What is it? Deepwater Horizon. Thanks. So, and now he's leaving. He was old, new guy. I don't know. Is he really going to do a whole lot of different things? Or maybe he's going to look at what Equinor just did and opened a new offshore oil field in the North Sea that's going to start producing 440,000 barrels per day by next summer. And he's going to be like, hey, maybe we should get on this stuff in our own backyard. I don't know. It's a really good question because, maybe BP should look at Shell. It should take like a little while and look at Shell and say, like, is this working for them? Are massive investments in power generation really going to bring value to the shareholders? Yeah. Because that's a real question that they have to ask. And it's just because it looks nice and pretty and makes you feel like you're doing good in the world doesn't mean it's bringing value to shareholders.
Yep. And I will beat this drum until I'm proven wrong. As more and more of these third world nations, developing nations, become first world, the demand for oil and gas will only go up. So I am, call me crazy, but I'm a little skeptical when I read these headlines that the companies, I think they do put money there. I think there's some good technology there, but I also think they've got to have a better grasp of long-term oil demand than someone like me who doesn't even have access to all the data they have. They have to have a lot better appreciation for what that's going to be. So I wonder how much of this is political posturing versus actual, real solutions based. And so it'll be interesting to see. But Bernard Looney. That's it. Yeah. Looney. Yeah. See, that's what you get paid, I guess, at Reuters, the big bucks for, to write those headlines. Do you write alliterations in your headlines?
I'm a terrible headline writer in general. No. So fun fact about writing for Forbes. So they don't have a headline generator, but they have this little nifty tool that you click and it evaluates how good your headline is based on certain things like, I don't know, there's certain weird things, and alliteration is not one of those categories. So I don't think it would give me any extra points for alliteration. I'm not sure what the points do in the long run, but
it gets
everybody
you the
knows
editor's
you want
choice
points.
deal. Yeah, it helps you get your editor's choice. That's what it is.
I did get editor's choice for a recent piece that was very exciting.
Well, every week on this podcast, you get editor's choice. So.
Editor's choice essentially means that, like, I'll stop getting hits. I have no idea why, but once I get editor's choice, it's like people just stop reading.
Everyone looks at that, they're like, oh, she's a teacher's pet this week. We're not reading her article.
It's so true. It's so true. Like my last one where I, like, explained Aramco's $75 billion dividend thing that they said, which basically means nothing, got editor's pick, but then it, like, topped out. Stopped. Yeah. I think my Bill de Blasio piece got editor's pick too, which I felt kind of bad about because, like, I basically just kind of trashed it. Yeah. Editor's pick, 925 views. That's, like, my least amount ever.
Wow. It's almost like the editor's holding you down. Like, he picks you and then, like, puts your head underwater. It's like, hey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I really hope my editor's not listening to me because she's a very, very sweet person.
We love you.
I love her, but...
You're great. It's awesome. It's the greatest thing ever. Up next, we have on Robbin Goodman, who is the Director of Business Programs and Corporate Affairs at the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations. Robbin, it's been a long time since I got to speak to you, like 2.5 hours. How's it going, sir?
Yeah, Ryan, I'm last 2.5 hours. I hope you've solved all the world's problems, and I'm looking forward to talking to you and Ellen today about energy.
In our infinite wisdom, we have.
Hey,
great. Look, I think I can retire now. We can probably shutter everything down and just live our lives, right?
Let's just be clear here, Robbin. Ellen, correct me if I'm wrong. We have given valuable advice on Venezuela on how to avoid their debt crisis. We have multiple times advised the Trump administration on how to handle China. The Aramco IPO, we've waited on that.
Tesla. We've given a lot of good advice to Tesla
and Tesla investors. So I appreciate that you are catching up to the shows and doing this. So, Robbin, real quick, for folks who aren't familiar, I think everyone knows who George H.W. Bush is. That's the first Bush. But what is the foundation? What do you guys do there? And then we'll talk a little bit about China and how the listeners should think about U.S.-China relations, where China plays in the global scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ryan, first for having me on here, Energy Week, and Ellen for giving up your precious time to let me flap my gums a little bit about what we do. As you said, I'm the Director of Business Programs and Corporate Affairs at the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations. We like to shorten that down to Bush-China Foundation at times, but definitely we are one of several legacy organizations that works on promoting and furthering the legacy of President George H.W. Bush as inspiration for future generations, future leaders, and for the people who are handling the relationship right now. So we're the only presidential organization focused solely on one bilateral relationship between two nations, and that's in all of the U.S. and including all nations involved in that. So we're really blessed to be able to have the inspiration from President Bush and his handling of the U.S.-China relationship during a very tumultuous and difficult time as an inspiration for how we can work through the issues of today, but still maintain a relationship that at least optimizes or works for both sides in a way that is constructive, in a way that is mutually beneficial, and in a way that brings about peace and prosperity for the people of all the world. And I do that on the business side, but we obviously always work on national security, work on different international relations issues such as the Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, nuclear non-proliferation. So all of those are different topics we cover, but energy and business is where my core focus is. And in that regard, I'm really appreciate being able to talk to you guys about that today.
So I know Ellen's going to have a ton of questions. It's probably OPEC and things around it. But listen, one of the things we were talking about a minute ago was Iran just announced that China pulled out of a recent deal for a $5 billion offshore sea deal. And we were talking about maybe some of the reasons why. You, as someone who is familiar with the Chinese government, the Chinese culture, help us understand how they see things. What is their perspective on the trade war, geopolitical? You turn on Fox News or MSNBC, wherever you fall on that side of the debate, you hear a lot of talk, but you're you've been there, you speak Mandarin, you're kind of boots on the ground. Help our listeners get a better sense of how the Chinese, when they read headlines or how they do business or how they think. We've heard a lot about long-term thinking and things like this. Kind of maybe separate the myth from the actual fact.
Sure, absolutely. This is a topic I love being able to discuss. Being from Texas, but having spent a good portion of time in China, and as you said, being able to speak the language and talk directly with the Chinese, it's something that I really find the Chinese overall, the leadership has a very long-term goals in mind. And when they do any project, whether it's an investment project, energy deal, what they're looking to do really is to ensure the stability of their country and the growth of their country over a long period of time. They're planning out not just next quarter, next year, next 5 years, but up into 10, 15, 100 years ahead. The smallest planning period for the country is what they call their 5-year plan. And that's when the country gets together through their representatives and puts together an economic plan to say this is going to be our goals and our focus for 5 years. But obviously the leadership is looking much further into the future. And so whatever deal is coming across their table and things they're negotiating, they're trying to think in those terms. And that's something that can be a little bit difficult for us to necessarily understand when, in a market economy, we're really faced with how do we plan for what's happening right now, what's happening right in front of us. And so I think when looking at any decision that China as a country or the Chinese businesses make or Chinese individuals, it's helpful to keep in mind that this is a country that understands its history to be 5,000 years. They understand their civilization to be one that goes through cycles of ups and downs, and they understand themselves to be players in a very long story. And so they often make decisions based on those timelines, and that can help kind of inform the way you see some of those decisions and maybe read into some of the decisions that they're making.
That's a really, really fascinating point. I'm someone who spent a lot of time studying Saudi Arabia and in particular studying Aramco. And one of the things that I discovered or that I've written about is that for a very long time, and I'm not sure this doesn't really apply in most recent years, but for a very long time, the Saudis were much more focused on long-term vision than on short-term goals. So that was one of the ways that Aramco became so profitable, is that they were always looking out for long-term profits and how to maximize long-term profits. And they weren't always particularly concerned about kind of the most current gyrations of the market. And I've argued that brought them great profits and great success. So it's interesting to think that if you think about China in maybe similar terms, although perhaps even, as you're saying, even longer terms. So would that perhaps lead us to maybe understand that maybe when China got into this deal, it was originally a deal with Total to develop Iranian natural gas, this idea that, perhaps not now or in 5 years or 10 years, but longer down the line, Iranian natural gas would be an important generator of an important growth industry, an important generator of profits, potentially, in fact, for China, or at least that China might use this natural gas, as Iran has a lot of natural gas. So would we now then interpret this as saying that their calculus has changed, that they no longer see or believe that Iran will be an important or that this deal would be beneficial to them in the long run? Is that maybe saying something about how effective they think these sanctions have done, or whether they think the sanctions will continue? What's your reading of this?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think one of the first things is I definitely can't speak directly to the Chinese leadership's thought and their reasonings for pulling out of this deal, apart from what they've been quoted and said on the record, which anyone can look at. But for us as Americans looking at this and observing this and trying to interpret what their intentions are, I think it's really important to also think about the perspective that Americans have around energy and natural gas. And it's something that Ryan and I have talked about quite a bit is, we really have made a push for energy independence is what we call it. It's being able to rely on local energy sources for our, for all the variety of our energy uses as a society. And that's something that through the early 2000s and up until today that we've continued to be very successful at. Now, the U.S. was the largest importer of oil all the way up until 2017 when China overtook the U.S., and China has continued to be the largest importer of oil. We know the difficulties around transporting natural gas that don't exist necessarily with oil, that only just now technology is starting to solve. But with that same mindset, China, who has the world's largest proven natural gas fields, almost double the natural gas that is being proven here in the U.S., they are a major producer of natural gas, but they're also a major consumer of natural gas, and their consumption of natural gas is going up. And if you look at their last 5-year plan, they have put into effect a goal to double their natural gas consumption from 7% of total energy consumption to 15% of total energy consumption. And so for them to do that, there's a multitude of different ways that they have and options that they have. And their ultimate goal in doing that is in order to address the environmental issues that have come with relying on coal as a primary energy source. And so looking at Iran and looking at their planning here, as well as their relationship with Russia, as well as their relationship with the U.S., and their domestic energy resources, one of the things we tend to conclude at the Bush-China Foundation, and it's been borne out in our discussions and in the Track 2 work that we've done, Track 2 diplomacy work that we've done on the U.S.-China trade friction, is that China is really not just looking for energy independence in terms of domestic production, as we tend to think about it. They're looking for essentially a diversified supply of energy, and natural gas is going to be their largest energy growth area. Just looking at their 5-year plan, you can see they have many trillions of cubic feet of natural gas to get into their country, whether it's pulling out from the ground or bringing it from abroad. And so with that in mind, if they're pulling out of this deal, as they said they are, and they're not developing this, then it's definitely a signal that in their mix, the energy mix they're looking to create, whether that's pipelines from Russia, pipelines from Iran, domestic energy sources, LNG tankers from Australia or the Gulf Coast of the U.S., that has their thinking has definitely shifted around Iran and its role in their overall energy mix for their country's development.
So one of the things, Robbin, help me understand, and the listeners as well, when you think of China, they have these long-term goals, but obviously, they have to deal in the here and now. How should we, when we're reading the news and they're reacting to stuff, how do you try to evaluate, okay, well, they had this long-term agenda that they've stated, for instance, if I had a long-term, agenda of, wanting to do X, Y, and Z by the time I'm 90, okay, well, that's very out there, and I'm working towards that, but there's stuff that's going to come up between here and now that makes me shift that plan and divert that plan. How are we to understand when they're signaling signals to the market or to the government or other governments? How should we interpret that? Should we interpret that as maybe they feel that they can maybe divert their plan a little bit, but ultimately overcome it to their long-term goal, or could you see it where they do shift monumental policies that would have long-term impacts on how they're going to do business with the world?
Sure, absolutely. I'm so glad that you are looking at these issues in this way and trying to dissect how it fits within this larger plan. And what I would say is that the Chinese definitely do make the decision on the margin. as everyone has to. And looking out long-term, trying to affect that, they can overcome some difficulties, whether that's, being able to put capital in upfront on projects, or being able to fund projects that don't have as high of a upfront return or a flow back to their country in the short term, but in the medium and long term do. But the way I would say is take, with that in mind, when they make a shift, they definitely have done it out of looking at an overall strategy and an overall plan for themselves. And I would caution to kind of interpret any one change or strategic change in isolation, but look at where. If for example, I think let's just take this example of the Iran deal. It definitely, to me, does not make would not signal a shift in their overall intention to switch to natural gas and to purchase natural gas from abroad as part of their energy mix. Because I think that's something that they have expressed a lot of interest in their other dealings with their other partners. Now, it definitely, there definitely is something to be said about their intentions towards Iran and with their calculuses, Alan said, about Iran and its viability in that plan. Specifically, how that has changed, I definitely cannot speak for the reasoning on it. And I'm not necessarily an expert on Iran-Chinese relations, but I can say from a 30,000-foot view that we can, very much take those intermediate steps and understand that their strategic long-term plan, though fixed, will be met in a different way than what maybe originally was set out.
That's a really, really interesting question. Another area, I think it's interesting considering also that I've wondered whether this decision has anything to do with the fact that the U.S. just put secondary sanctions on Chinese tankers that were carrying, or that they had determined had carried Iranian oil in contravention of sanctions. But I'm also now thinking about China's relationship with Venezuela, which has recently come under fire. Interestingly, there was just news that so CNPC, which is the same company I think that was involved in Iran, CNPC runs an upgrader, the last apparently the last functioning upgrader in Venezuela, along with PDVSA, in order that they need to get their crude oil into a state that they can actually export it. And apparently last week they stopped running this upgrader. And we also had word that the managers of the PDVSA managers who were involved in this were just arrested. And so I wonder if that's a symbol. Is this a symbol? Is Venezuela sending a sign to China saying, we're still all in on our relationship with you, or is this relationship just kind of falling apart and there's nothing Venezuela can do to change it?
Yeah, the Venezuela component of China's overall plan in South America and these other developing nations is quite interesting, especially from a U.S. perspective. One of the ways that we as the U.S. have to look at our overall goals and planning is, those countries with which we've attempted to use economic pressure to help shape their political regimes, we definitely now have a competitor in that, in that realm. And that's that China has quite a bit of economic power and ability to invest and to do deals. And so for countries like Venezuela, that to them is definitely a strategic alternative. And so they have to be thinking in those terms of, how do I maximize my benefit as a country and as a regime of, ruling regime of this country and with my international partners. And China has offered to them a deal that the U.S. would have a hard time offering, and that really is the ability to do business for business with this regime. And you're looking at two authoritarian regimes who can work on those terms together versus the U.S. definitely looks to move into the political realm in any country, a developing country at least, with which it employs economic resources. And so to Venezuela, it's definitely something of just a different partner that they're working with than the U.S. And I would say that, there may be some truth and some solid reasoning to see any of their actions that may strengthen the relationship with China as a sign that they're saying, yes, we want to continue to work on economics only, and these other issues we can push them to the side.
Okay, I know we're running up against the clock here, so let's talk about a little bit more about the organization, the foundation rather, and the conference coming up on October 28th and 29th in Houston, Texas. For the listeners that are going to be there, obviously Robbin will be there, I will be there. We have a lot of great stuff going on. I'm excited to see. It's not just energy, so I know we have some non-energy based things on the agenda. Obviously, you want to focus on energy, but make sure you hit those as well as you talk about what they can expect. BushChinaConference.org is the website. We'll be sure to link to that in the show notes.
Absolutely. Well, look, I invite everyone, please, if you're interested in these topics, you're interested in U.S.-China relations. Interestingly enough, we got to talk about quite a lot of geopolitical issues here and China's relationship with other countries. But where our bread and butter really is the U.S.-China relationship. And energy factors very largely into that. Into our conference, we'll have a really world-class panel on U.S.-China energy relationships and cooperation. And there's really, something that Ryan and I have been able to discuss at length is the numerous opportunities in the area of energy for the U.S. and the China governments to work together, as well as private enterprises to work together. And so we are probably one of the leading voices on U.S.-China energy cooperation, and we've put out many kind of groundbreaking ideas and policy ideas and frameworks to make that cooperation more mutually beneficial and more stable. One such idea is the U.S.-China Energy Free Trade and Investment Agreement, which we'll discuss more in links at the conference. But as you said, the conference covers many more topics, such as U.S.-China cooperation on on food and agriculture, on non-communicable diseases, energy, philanthropy. It's really one of those. It's really going to be a great conference that really looks at the whole of the relationship. And I might say this is the first conference that we'll be hosting since the passing of President Bush. And so there's very large memorial aspect in that we are now truly carrying forward President Bush's legacy and his vision on the U.S.-China relationship for the U.S.-China relationship into the future as an organization and as a conference. And I would say as my last thing, if you're interested in taking part in the conference, interested in becoming a sponsor or in getting involved with the foundation, please feel free to reach out to me at rgoodman@bushchinafoundation.org. Take a look at the website, bushchinaconference.org, or reach out to Ryan Ray, who has been kind enough to join our organization via the conference organizing committee and has done a very good job in helping promote our organization, the conference, and the topics that we're looking to have discussions on. So with that, we're also on all of the social media platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. You can find us there. And I'd just like to say thank you to Ellen and Ryan for having me on, and look forward to doing this again sometime.
Yeah, bushchinaconference.org is the website. The most accurate thing that you may have said all day was it's going to be a world-class conference, because you didn't say because I was going to be there, but it was kind of in there. So I'm glad. I mean, I just want to bring attention that you didn't explicitly say because of me, but we know that's why, right? That's the main reason.
Well, Ryan, I figure if people are on here listening to Energy Week, they know that it's given.
Okay, fair enough.
It's something we definitely don't have to beat down there because people know the expert of Ryan Ray.
I got you. When you're on other shows, you're leading with that. Ryan Ray will be on. Okay, that makes sense. It makes sense. Okay, no, Robbin, thank you. Excited about the work you guys are doing. We love talking about China on this show. So as things develop with the trade talks, and I say develop, hopefully progress, not digress, we'll be sure to get you guys back on, you or David, and to hear more about what your perspective on this is. Look forward to hearing more about the Energy Free Trade Agreement. That is exciting stuff there, and we'll be in touch soon. BushChinaConference.org is the website. Be sure to go to check that out. Robbin, thank you for your time today.
All right. Thank you, guys.
And once again, that was Robbin Goodman with the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations. Then the conference is October 28th and 29th in Houston, Texas. BushChinaConference.org. Ellen, there will be celebrities there like myself is all I really know at the point, but I will be there. No, they haven't announced all the speakers, but because I am doing some work with them, they have some pretty big names that will be there. It should be exciting. If you're in energy or not in energy, they have some other stuff that's should be impressive as well. Ellen, with that being said, where will you be this week? We were talking about something before the show started, maybe that we wanted to reference. Oh, the panel with Dr. Sullivan. Oh
yeah, that is going to be okay. So I that's with the you know what? Let me get the name. So while I'm getting the name, I will. Okay, so I am going to be this week on Bloomberg. I'm going to have a piece coming out on Bloomberg about Iraq and the protests and the risks to Iraqi oil supply. Coming out there probably Tuesday morning. Okay. Then I'm going to be on, for all of our international listeners, I will be on CNBC International.
There you go.
And that's going to be at, I think, either 8:30 or 9:30 a.m. Dubai time, which is 12:30 a.m. U.S. Eastern time. And that's Thursday morning.
So 11:30 Central for us.
11:30 Wednesday night.
Wednesday night, yeah, 11:30 p.m.
Wednesday night.
23:30 p.m. Yeah, Central.
Yeah, and then on CNBC International, if you get that, I get that on my package, but it's not in HD for some weird reason.
Yeah. And you also have an event. It's called Treading a Tightrope, how to best balance and advance the multifaceted Arab and U.S. relationship. Arab.
Is that what it's called? I'm not even really sure what the conference is.
28th annual Arab, whatever.
Arab U.S. Policymakers Conference.
It's like Arab. It's like hard for me to even say it that way. It's like my tongue doesn't want to cooperate. Arab U.S. Policymakers Conference.
There you go.
And that will be in Washington, D.C. That's 1300 Pennsylvania Avenue, which is really close to another building on Pennsylvania, I suspect. So maybe Dr. Energy.
President Trump, if you want a quick advising about what to do about energy, I'll be in town.
I think he should hit you up. Okay.
Yeah. This is, by the way, this is from the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations, and we're going to be talking about energy.
At the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. It would be pretty cool. Looking forward to hearing about that. We will link to that in the show notes for listeners who want to check that out. Text One Guys podcast for me and Energy Week podcast here and my usual spots. I did get someone the other day call me up and said, hey, they literally said this, did I see Dr. Energy on Bloomberg? That was the exact slogan. I was like, probably. And I was like, he's like, wow, I didn't know that. I was like, yeah, she's a pretty big deal. I was like, oh, that's pretty wholesome. I'm like, yeah. So we need to clarify, when we see Bloomberg, it's not just the written Bloomberg content. You could also be on TV Bloomberg. So keep that in mind.
Or radio. I do radio a lot for them. I really love their radio show, especially Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney. I like them.
Basically the number 2 person at Bloomberg now, so that's good enough. So, okay, for the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We will be back next week. Yeah, next week on Columbus Day, October the 14th. And I did not say this earlier, so I better say it before I get in trouble. Happy 13th wedding anniversary to my wife. Today is 13 years, and so, yes, next week.
Congratulations.
Yeah, next week is my Scarlett's 4-year birthday. 4th birthday, but today is our 13th. I didn't say it earlier, and I was like, she didn't listen, but in the random event that she does listen, I better get it out there. So happy 13 years.
We'll put it in the show notes.
To my wife, Haley, I love you. And to listeners, we will talk to you